And welcome everyone to our second Nacelle Partner Office Hours. I'm Austin Rutherford. I'm the Senior Vice President of Customer Success and Solutions Engineering. And normally to help kick these off, we'd have Brian Jabor. He's going through some internet issues, so he may be in with us later, but I'll be kicking things off to get things going. Hopefully everyone had a great Black Friday, Cyber Monday. We had some great, great metrics and observations we've had on our side, and hopefully you did the same. So to get things started, here's a quick intro, and this will be probably a quicker moving one than the last one. We had a lot of intro slides in last week's partner hours. This one's going to really dig into the partner updates fairly quickly, and Unita is going to be giving those partner updates. And then we're going to quickly hand things over to Spencer Smitherman to talk about A/B testing and phased rollouts. So please post your channels or post your questions inside of the actual comments here within the YouTube or in the Slack channel, and we'll be glad to help answer any questions. And at the very end, we'll have an open Q&A as part of that as well. So Tech Talk topics. Here's a current listing of topics that we have. We want to make these sessions very valuable, to you. So if there are additional topics you'd like to see covered, please post them, email them to us. But we want to make this a very valuable experience for you. So please send those our way. All right. So next up, I'm going to add in Unita here. Welcome, Unita.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Just give me a second here. Here you go. Good morning. Nice to see everyone surviving Black Friday, Cyber Monday. Thank you, Austin. So a couple of partner updates I have from our side. Don't forget to join our partner community if you haven't at Slack, at nestlepartner.slack.com. And the second one is partner directory. We're very excited. Finally, we're going to have it up and running next week. So a lot of you already reached out to me and already updated. Thank you so much. If you haven't done it, please do so. The link is over there, below there. And as you know, a lot of merchants right after Black Friday, they want to know how they can improve their site speed. And this is a good time to do it because they're going to go to our website and they want to see what other solution could be working in the headless environment. And the third one, we have a very exciting upcoming webinar with Lola, one of our very loyal customer, and also with Recharge, our partner, about how site speed influences the customer buying journey. So it's going to be on December 15 at 2 p.m. Eastern. So stay tuned for the link for that. And the last one, we have a NUC Starter Doc update. So it will be updated by tomorrow to align with the most recent NUC Starter code. So visit docs.getnacelle.com to get the most updated NUC Starter code. And with that, just one reminder before Austin take back again. Remember at the end in the Q&A, we have, we know that you all need extra caffeine this morning and especially this week. So we have 5 first questions that you ask. You guys gonna get $10 each off Starbucks gift card. Back to you, Austin.
Hey, thanks, Unita. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Spencer, who's going to be our main presenter today. Hey, welcome, Spencer.
Hey, thanks, Austin. Appreciate the handoff. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Spencer Smitherman. I'm the Director of Solutions Architecture here at Nacelle, focused on not only pre-sales solutions engineering and helping customers understand the value of Nacelle and from a technical standpoint, but also all of the post-sales implementations as well. And so always think of me as a resource on the technical end. That's what I'm here for. But I have a history in A/B testing, personalization. I spent 5 years working at Optimizely. And so even though I'm an Optimizely homer, I've worked with tools like BWO, LaunchDarkly, Google Optimize, et cetera, Adobe Analytics, and Maximizer. So I have a lot of experience in the space. And one of the things I thought might be interesting for this group is to talk a little bit about just A/B testing in general, but then what A/B testing looks like within the Nacelle ecosystem and specifically when you're running a PWA that could be statically generated within the context of a really modern web framework. And so we'll dig into this a little bit in the next few slides. But as some quick background, just to tee things up, A/B testing in its simplest form is really about splitting traffic into two separate groups, typically just a control and a variant. But you could have an ABCN test that has many different variants. There's also permutations like a multivariate test where you're pairing different permutations of maybe a different site copy and different color of a button, for example, and seeing which of those permutations work the best. But critically, the A/B test is there to split that traffic, gather data during the test period, and then at the end of that test period, make a determination based on the statistical significance of that variance impact on a specific metric against the control. And we also have this concept of a phased rollout, which can be used in conjunction with an A/B test. You can be measuring and monitoring that traffic for a specific metric, or it could just be based off some health metrics of maybe that new variant that you're pushing out. In the case of Nacelle, it's most commonly that new PWA that merchants are rolling out. But the same kinds of rules apply. You can set some sort of percentage threshold where you're going to begin rolling out, and we see some of our best customers doing that as they go live with Nacelle, just to mitigate risk and make sure that all of the dials are tuned, if you will, before they go live to the full public. So with that, one of the things that I'd like to cover is a little bit of the traditional approach that has been taken with A/B testing historically, and traditionally this has been done through client-side JavaScript. And the companies like Optimizely, VWO, all of them have really popularized A/B testing. It became very, very popular from about 2015 all the way through up to today. And it was done because we did use what you see is what you get editor. And it allowed business users, marketing folks to be able to get in, build their own tests in a really UI-driven way, and gave them the ability to run tests and really increase that site the testing velocity for their sites without a lot of developer input. Well, one of the primary mechanisms in which these tests were generated is just through doing client-side DOM manipulations at runtime. So after the page was fetched, typically the Optimizely JavaScript or the VWO JavaScript would just be running and then modifying that page on the fly. And there's a kind of natural resistance to this from the developer standpoint, because you suddenly have essentially a approved cross-site scripting attack that's happening on your site. You're modifying the page, you're modifying the DOM, and you're doing so in a way that's controlled not by a developer's workflow. And so with that, one of the things that started to come up with this, with these kind of the problems with this approach was really fourfold. And I think we could probably extrapolate more if we sat down and thought about it. But for the sake of this presentation, really focused on these four issues. And the first was that of flickering of original content. When you're running client-side JavaScript and you run, I'm sure from the agency side, the more third-party JavaScript that you're running on your site, the slower the site will perform, since you're making more requests, requiring more compute time by that device, especially on mobile where compute times are constrained and you have a limited number of open sockets you can create within a given web session. And one of the chief problems that comes up is just a flickering of original content. So when you're running a traditional A/B test, you don't want to be able to have visitors see the original version of the page. But if you're loading in content from a CDN, from like a VWO CDN from some point of presence, that content can be loaded in late. You can see the original page. You'll see the page change, and then suddenly you have experiment results that aren't really reliable anymore because you're not really sure how that person is responding to that new treatment. And so with that, one of the ways that people have got around that is either really using two different philosophies. One is to place that JavaScript in the head of the document and have it load before render. The page is actually rendered, and that is great from a UI perspective. It ensures that we can synchronously fetch that data, retrieve it, and then modify the DOM. But unfortunately, it also leads to pretty significant performance degradation, since you're essentially holding up the main event loop within the context of the browser, and preventing the rest of the page from rendering. So if for whatever reason, Optimizely or Google Optimize or whatever service you're using, if their CDN was down, if if performance was really slow, that's going to affect the rest of the session for the visitor. The other option, which is employed really heavily by VWO, is to kind of cheat. They use an asynchronous fetch, so they'll still fetch the content from the CDN, same approach, but instead of forcing the page to wait, the design decision was to just hide the DOM. So you just set the opacity to 0, and then they can't actually see the page. And then once the client-side JavaScript has finished making the DOM modifications client-side, then all of a sudden you have the page reappear. And that's kind of the way to cheat, if you will, and make it a little easier to manage the flickering of original content. Both of which, though, create either just a blank, both of them just create a blank page, frankly, until the JavaScript is done running. And so that's really one of the biggest complaints from a lot of merchants, but also other customers in other industries when they're deploying A/B testing solutions is, hey, how can I make this not affect my site speed? We have a DevOps team that has a performance budget, and again, there's that natural conflict that happens between departments within these organizations. Then the third problem that comes up is really just the conflict with modern web technologies. Starting in 2015, 2016, single page apps started becoming more popular. Angular, React now, and as well as Vue have become very, very popular. And within the context of Nacelle, when site speed and being able to make millions from milliseconds, if you will, has become so critical for merchants, and making that app-like experience for their website, both on desktop and on mobile. Deploying strategies like static site generation, server-side rendering, ISR, through Next.js. All of these are in direct conflict with these kinds of A/B testing approaches, where you're trying to modify the DOM. And if you're ever rehydrating the page using React, then all of a sudden you have this instance where you have a client-side JavaScript file constantly making changes and moving things around. And so it creates a lot of complexity when you're trying to run a client-side A/B test in these more modern frameworks. And then finally, one of the biggest problems with client-side A/B testing was just the limitations around your use cases. So if you ever wanted to do price testing, you just can't do it with a traditional client-side A/B test. It has to be done server-side. That's where the data is actually being held. And so some of these more complex use cases, price testing, other types of personalization, where, for example, you want to pull data from maybe segments, personas, API. Those things are harder to facilitate in the client-side context. And so, some of those limitations are difficult to navigate. And so one of the solutions to this, there's a lot of different ways you can solve this problem, but one of the ways that I'll demo and talk through today is traffic splitting at the edge. And so most modern CDN frameworks will provide compute at the edge features. I'm using that as a general catch-all term. I list them here: AWS, Lambda at edge. Netlify has edge handlers. Vercel has edge functions. Cloudflare has workers. So everyone kind of has their different flavor of compute at the edge. But critically, all of these kind of work in a very similar fashion, and that they all ensure very, very low latency, because they're all the services all share the same point of presence as the rest of the nodes within the CDN. And so you can see here on the right, down at the bottom, the Cloudflare workers have a timeout of about 10 milliseconds, so very, very short TTLs for these worker instances. But you can see, from some of the testing that I'd done earlier this year on this demo that I'll do in a little bit, the 99th percentile is 2.1 milliseconds. So if you compare that to 500 milliseconds that it might take to fetch a client-side test, from a CDN within the context of the browser, plus the execution time of that, it's just orders of magnitude difference when it comes to performance, and that's really the benefit, right, of taking this approach. Is you get to do the types of complex A/B tests you like, complex personalization use cases, segmentation, things like that, without losing out on the performance benefits of your Next.js or next application. And then up at the top, I just have like a very basic overview. This is an Optimizely example of content being received from the CDN and how an edge decider service can work. But with that, I'll kind of go over just a very brief overview of how the testing approach works in a kind of pseudocode type way, I guess, right now. First is, at least from the context of a Cloudflare worker, you're just listening for new inbound requests coming in, and then determining if that requester is already in the test by the presence of a cookie. And so for this kind of contrived example that I'll share in a little bit, I'm just using a very, very basic, traffic splitting approach, which is just using some JavaScript to do it. But the same approach could be applied to the Optimizely SDK or VWO full stack SDKs. All of those would work in this context. The implementation would change slightly depending on what flavor of SDK you're using and what approach you're taking. But in general, the approach will be consistent. But then if that requester has the cookie, then you assign them to that appropriate group if they had already been bucketed. But then if the requester doesn't have the cookie, then you actually do the assignment and then pass as the set cookie parameter in the response header back to the browser, what cookie that user should have, and then consequently which response they should get from the CDN. So with that, let me open up the demo. So I have here, I've set up just it's called nacelletestlab.com. It's a very, very basic set of two applications. One application is hosted on Heroku. Another application is hosted on Vercel. And it's fronted by Cloudflare. So we're actually proxying requests through Cloudflare. And in this case, I got the old site that's listed on Heroku. And so I'm just opening up the incognito window. We'll open it up again. Let's see if we get the new store in this case. But if we kept on opening this up, we'll get distributed, hopefully evenly, across the different. We are getting a 50-50 split across each instance. But what's happening here is, again, from the response, I'm just setting what I called first experiment in the control variation as this cookie value, and that way anytime I ever refresh this again, I'll always still be in this bucket no matter what, until I open up a new session, which will of course rebucket me into that experiment. And to talk a little bit about what the implementation looks like, here's just a quick view of what that Cloudflare worker looks like. Again, just to kind of walk through the code at a very basic level, we have an event listener. This is just a function that Cloudflare exposes for us to provide a handler. And whenever we receive a fetch from a browser, we will pass this handler to actually name the first experiment. We'll have two different responses that we can generate. By one is through this new storefront, another is through this old storefront. The nacelletestlab.com versus the headless .nacelletestlab.com. Typically, just doing it within a different subdomain is sufficient for this type of use case. We've had other customers do this type of arrangement as they launch their new PWA with a good bit of success. And then finally, if the cookie is present and it's within the control, then they get the control response. If the cookie is present and has the test, then they fall into the test bucket. Otherwise, we go through our our bucketing algorithm, if you will, which is just math.random and checking to see if it's above, if it's less than 0.5, and then and splitting that traffic that way. And then critically setting, not only responding with the new response, but also setting that cookie so that they stay bucketed in the proposed variant. And so that's a basic overview of what that implementation looks like. I there are a lot of caveats. every single A/B test has a lot of different caveats you need to be thinking about. Paid search, things like that are all on the table. Things that need to be considered. But ultimately, that the purpose of this was just to show off the general approach and what can be done from that standpoint. So with that, I'll pause talking for a little bit and open up for general questions from the audience.
Great, thanks, Spencer. And while the questions start to queue up here, from performing these A/B testing after you run them, what are some of the outputs or findings that typically you would hope to or expect to find?
Yeah, so it's all driven by the metrics you want to affect. So, for example, if you're running this in the example that was providing, where it's like you're really looking at two different hosted applications, maybe a Shopify application that's with the kind of the Shopify monolith versus a new PWA, tracking things like bounce rate, for example, tracking things like end of funnel conversion, revenue. All of those, because this is an entirely new site, those types of metrics would be valuable to track. And then in terms of actually determining statistical significance, you could use a service. If you use the Optimizely SDK, Optimizely provides a frequentist approach to determining statistical significance right out of the box. VWO, I think, provides a Bayesian approach out of the box as well. But if you're looking to do it in a really inexpensive way, the really cheap way to do it is just to go online and find a t-test in an Excel doc, and you can just plug in all of the parameters, the number of people in the test, etc. And that spreadsheet can give you an answer as well around stat sig. So lots of different ways to kind of measure and view that output.
Awesome, thank you, Spencer. Cool. All right. Just a reminder, any additional topics you'd like to have covered on these, please post them in the general Slack channel or reach out to the partner team. Glad to help make these more meaningful for you in the future. All right. Adding Unita in. Hi, Unita. Hey, any additional questions that have come in so far?
I think we have some questions over here. Let me just look at them on the channel. I think first question was, how should paid search be handled during a test like this?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it can be kind of tricky in that sense, because paid search has a lot of different attribution requirements, and there's other kinds of nuances that should be considered there. Typically, for like the use case that I just showed off, I think it would be valuable to exclude visitors that had a UTM campaign parameter or a Google Click ID coming through, and essentially creating a smaller segment of folks that are either just natural, the people that just search directly to the site, or just came through to search directly and not through paid avenues. And the purpose of that is just to make sure that they're not being docked on any of the paid search attribution or any of the other kind of concerns with Facebook advertising, things like that. So I think it's something to consider when it comes to limiting that. And so just food for thought.
Interesting. Okay. Another question we have over here, Spencer. Does this test approach work with Safari after the most recent tracking protection update?
Yeah, so Safari, for those that you don't know, it's the intelligent tracking protection, like 2 point whatever, and they prevent they limit how long, for example, cookies can be active in the browser. So, for example, if you use document.cookie, if you use that API client side, I forget the number of days specifically, but it's significantly limited, and so that can affect your test results. Visitors that might have been in variation B might not get variation B after several days if they haven't come back to the site, and that that local cache, that local storage, if you will, has been eliminated from because of that cookie being gone. And so the reason that we use that set cookie response header is to make sure that that's as durable as possible. And so thankfully that this approach is going to be the most durable of other types of approaches compared to like a client side test.
Okay, thank you. And another question we have over here: what kinds of risks need to be considered with regard to SEO?
Yeah, that's another another good question, and another thing that you really have to think through pretty carefully. One is in the context of these redirects, and what I was doing in this example is using 301 redirects. The permanently moved flag is considered to be more SEO friendly per Moz and some of the SEO documentation that's out there. Same thing with utilizing like that rel canonical tagging on your control pages. That helps Google search better understand the presence of URLs with duplicate or similar content. So those are things to consider. In general, I would just recommend before doing especially a test like this, that's you're kind of going very deep and doing a whole different web application that you're testing. When you're doing something like this, you really should be consulting an SEO expert. So whether that's internally at your agency that has that, or if you partner with other agencies that do SEO specific content, you really have to be on top of it, so you're not affecting anything. Generally speaking, Google has no concerns with A/B testing. They actually encourage it, since they do a lot of it on their own sites as well. But they do have very specific policies around things like no cloaking and basically deceptive practices. And it's also very hard to figure out exactly what those are, since SEO practices are and the algorithms themselves are kept secret. So consult an SEO expert, and that'd be my recommendation for that.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point to mention, right? We have a lot of our agency partners here on the call in this tech talk. Like they're very good in what they're doing, especially with the A/B testing. So a lot of them like with a lot of expert in SEO. So very good point. Thank you, Spencer. And I have another question for you. Can client-side experimentation still work when pages are being rendered server-side or statically generated?
I wouldn't recommend it. It's possible. You can within Optimizely, they developed a set of features that use DOM mutation observers to actively modify the DOM whenever changes were being detected. And it's really expensive from a compute perspective and takes up a lot of CPU usage within the context of the browser. And so it's possible, but it's not recommended. And so doing something like this with the full stack product is really the approach that really should be taken. And these things, one of the things I think comes up when, especially when marketing teams hear this, is there's a lot of consternation around this, because they're like, hey, wait, like I was able to run these tests without developer input. And I think there's sometimes some frustration on their parts. But truly, this is an opportunity for the development teams and the marketing teams to partner together on really impactful tests. And so instead of pushing out lots of different simple tests that may not really be moving the needle on the e-commerce side, you can think of some ambitious projects, some more complex use cases that can be partnered with that team. Again, maybe around price testing, things like that, and roll those out in a really concerted manner that would be really high value for the organization. So I see a lot of opportunities with these types of approaches as well.
Excellent. Thank you. And another question, as we know, right? Like a lot of clients choose to go headless because they want to offer a bespoke experience for the customers. And though that means personalization, right? So the question that we have here is personalization possible using this approach?
Yeah, and that's one of the great advantages of having everything done server side or done through a worker or through something at the edge is you can interface with like a segment personas API based on a user ID, whether it's a known user ID or some other data that you get from the browser. Cloudflare, for example, has geolocation built into their API framework. So all of this kind of stuff can be used for personalization, and you have access to that server side, whereas you don't necessarily have access to that client side all the time. So yeah, and the short answer is yes. Personalization, segmentation, all of these types of use cases can be enabled. It just really depends, again, on like really thinking about what that use case is for your marketing team and like what's the thing that you really want to push, and then making sure that we define that segment technically and push the test out in a proper way.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I think that's it. We cover all the questions. Back to you, Austin. Thank you, Spencer.
All right. Hey, thank you very much, everyone, for your time. It's been a great, roughly 30 minutes here. Look forward to having many more of these. And Spencer, thank you for putting together the content. Hopefully it was useful for everyone out there. These are recorded. They'll be posted up inside of the just immediately after the call. You'll be able to watch these in recorded mode up on the Nacelle Partners channel. And please give us feedback. We'd like to make these as useful as possible to you all. And hopefully everyone has a great week. All right. Thank you and take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.